Welcome to the Veritas Forum, engaging university students and faculty in discussions about life's hardest questions and the relevance of Jesus Christ to all of life.
Thank you very much for taking the time to come out tonight, and hope it would prove to be worthwhile for you. I'd like to start by talking a little bit about the science that I do, just one slide, so that you get an idea of what I do, and then I'm going to go into how I came to faith, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about how that faith has impacted my science and and the course of science in general. So this is just an overview slide of the different areas that we work in, and I'll just take you through this briefly, is that we work on composites that have been used in spacecraft, where we put carbon nanotubes inside of composite materials to allow them to heat and be used for repair in space. We work on new forms of graphene. It's called a laser-induced graphene, where we can make graphene from commercial plastic films, and this is moving into the use in supercapacitors, which are like batteries, but they give you much higher power than batteries, and they'll charge much faster. And we're using these in flexible platforms because it's all based on flexible electronic systems. We've learned how to split carbon nanotubes longitudinally, and that will make graphene nanoribbons. That's been licensed by EMD Merck. You may have heard of Merck Corporation, the pharmaceutical company. They have a materials division, and that's been licensed by Merck. We have other platforms where we are able to do de-icing of films, and I'll get that started on this little movie. As that ice is melting away, that's going to turn out to be really an important discovery. You'll see that ice just melt right off. We can put a voltage across glass now and melt that off. But what's interesting about that glass, and you'll see it just drop right off, and then that's the thermocouple underneath, is that glass is also RF transparent. So if you were to use indium tin oxide like what's on your smartphone, that would not be RF transparent. The major building material that's used on skyscrapers is glass when you look at it. You'd be really bummed out if you went in that skyscraper and you couldn't use your cell phone. So if you had conductive glass, that would not be RF transparent, and so your cell phone wouldn't work from in that building. But now we can do de-icing and also have it RF transparent. We've made graphene from every sort of carbon source. This is the leg of a roach that we heat up to 1,000 degrees, and that roach turns into graphene. We've done it with Girl Scout cookies. We took a box of Girl Scout cookies. We just took a little bit of that and put it on copper at 1,000 degrees. It turned into graphene. Girl Scout cookies are $4 a box. If you convert all of that Girl Scout cookie carbon into graphene, all of that one box, you could sell that graphene for $15 billion, the price of graphene today. There's just no market for that much. But it just shows you that the value of something is not in the element, but in how the elements are arranged into molecular structure. You could take, for example, a human being. What's the value of a human being? After a human being is cremated, it turns into CO2 and water. What's the value of the CO2 and water that's come out? That's less than a penny. It's the construction of the molecular system that gives it value. We've made graphene quantum dots. Graphene quantum dots are $1 million per kilogram. But we've learned how to make these now from coal in one step from coal, and coal is $60 per ton. Think about that, $60 per ton, $1 million per kilogram. A kilogram is 2.2 pounds. And so we've learned how to do that in one step. This has been licensed to a company that is going to be exploiting this. This has been worked with Lockheed Martin, transition there. We've made graphene nanotube hybrids. This is for batteries. We have batteries now, lithium-ion batteries, that can charge in 5 to 10 minutes, but have 10 times the capacity that your batteries have today. So really, these can have huge advantages once we make the right materials. We've made graphene oxide. This is a technology. The synthesis of graphene oxide has been licensed to EMD Merck as well. Another company has started, though, named Zonko. Zonko uses this material to remove radioactive elements from water. So we started this company that could help to clean up Fukushima, for example, these nuclear disaster sites, and also remove radioactive elements from groundwater. We've made memory for computers that's transparent. So imagine the glass display on your cell phone being flexible, so now it won't break if you drop it, but also have the memory embedded into that. And this has been licensed to a company called Weebit. We do a lot on the medical applications. This has been licensed to two companies, a company named Accelerox and another company named Avid Chemotherapeutics. And then we work in the capture of CO2 from natural gas, and this is all licensed to a company named Apache. Apache has a lot of platforms. It had a lot of platforms in the Gulf. We make flexible supercapacitors. This is licensed to an automotive company that makes electronic batteries, lithium-ion batteries for automobiles. And then we work on this last area of nano cars. These are single molecule cars with little light activated motors in them. And we can park 30,000 of these across the diameter of a human hair. So they're very, very small, 2 nanometers by 3 nanometers. We're learning how to manipulate these and drive these across surfaces, and I was just presented it today actually in the physics engineering department. So that's a brief overview of some of the areas that we work in. This is my current chemistry family. These are my students and postdocs working in my lab, and the lab managers that are there. And so these are the folks that actually do all the work. And I really care about these folks. And that doesn't mean I'm nice all the time. I try to be nice all the time, but I fall far short. But I really do care about them, and they're the ones that do the work, and they're great folks, and I enjoy working with them. So how did I become interested in chemistry? Well, I wanted to be a New York State trooper. It means a state policeman. And it turned out that I couldn't get into the academy when I was graduating from high school because I was colorblind. So I couldn't get into the academy. I'm not sure that that would inhibit you today from becoming a state trooper. I think you can be a paraplegic and be a state trooper today. But at the time, there was no entry because I was colorblind. So I was going to study forensic science. So I thought I'd work in a crime lab. But really something my father told me, he says, why don't you just study chemistry more broadly? And then once you're done with your chemistry degree, then you can specialize in forensic science. And the amazing thing is that at the age of 17, I took my father's advice. And he was absolutely right, because then I took organic synthesis and organic chemistry when I was a sophomore, and I just fell in love with organic chemistry. It was the greatest thing. To show you how much I loved organic chemistry and molecular structure, I see structure in everything, but when I was an undergraduate, every Friday night when the campus library would empty out and classrooms would empty out, I would take my chemistry textbook and work not just the problems that were assigned, I would work all the problems at the end of every chapter in that big, thick chemistry textbook. That's how much I loved organic chemistry. I know it sounds crazy, but it's just something that I really enjoy. And so I started seeing structure in everything, and I'm going to underscore this point because it's become important as we get to the end of this talk. So that when I look at anything, I know what the molecular structure is that makes it up. So I know why a carpet fiber is stiff. You can take a carpet fiber and pull up, it'll stand up that high and won't even fall over, and it's just barely thick enough for you to be able to see, much thinner than a human hair. But it stays very, 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 it's a very stiff material, and I know why it is, why that happens. I know why it is that you sit on a seat cushion and it will depress and then come back. Why that is. You sit on just a bale of cotton like that, it'll depress and stay depressed. Why is it that polyurethane foams spring back? I know why it is that people's hair has the structure that it is, and it sometimes becomes almost a burden to know this, because what happens is when I'm speaking with people, I'm looking at them in the eye, And as I look in their eyes, I'm seeing the molecular structure changing as you have this molecular Dobson-type structure that's going from trans to cis structure. And then it causes a cascade of proton interaction that signals then to the brain. And then the neurons start firing. And I start thinking about these neurons that are firing as I'm speaking to them and they're learning. Because this neuron firing is an electronic memory. That is quickly turned into protein-based memories, protein memory occurring very quickly. And then when you go to sleep tonight, what happens is that you start getting hardwired neuron connects that start giving you a hard structure to that memory so that you're unlikely to forget it. And so that's when it starts turning into hardwired interconnect memory. And so as I'm speaking to them, I'm thinking about all these interactions that are going through their eyes and their brain as I'm speaking. Everything, I see molecular structure, because I know the structure of the molecules that are there, and I know the types of interactions and the types of changes that they undergo. And you just get this by working with molecules every day. This is the good news. This is how I came to faith. So my background is this. I grew up in a Jewish home in New York City. A secular Jewish home, meaning that we did not practice Judaism very strongly at all. We observed a couple of the high holy days every year, but we did very little beyond that. When I was 18 years old, I went to college. In August of my freshman year, I met a young man in the laundry room, and as we were doing laundry in that room together, I asked him if he wanted to play pro football when he graduated, because he was on the Syracuse University football team. And he says, "Oh, I'm not good enough for that." I said, "What do you want to do?" He says, "Well, probably lay ministry." And I didn't even know what lay ministry was. I said, what do you mean? I don't know what that is." He says, "Oh, well, it's maybe something like a missionary." I thought, missionary? We don't need missionaries today. This is 1977. I mean, we've got TV. Why do you need missionaries today? Just put it on TV. He told me he'd like to give me an illustration of the gospel, and I didn't even know what he meant. But I said, "Sure, go ahead." And came up to my room, and he drew a picture for me. And it was this picture, where you put people on one side and God on the other side, and we were separated by some chasm called sin. And he had me read a few verses from the Bible, and then he started to sketch this in, how the people can get to God is through Jesus Christ, and we get over this chasm of sin. It's a remarkable story. And part of the story goes this way, that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that he's risen from the dead, you shall be saved. Now think about that. How can any thinking man or woman believe in a physical resurrection of a man? How can that happen? If it were not the case that it were true. As he was sharing with me, he had me read a verse, and it says, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." And I looked at him and I said, "I'm not a sinner." And he was shocked by that. And in modern secular Judaism, we don't dwell on sin. It was actually a much simpler life. And I said, I've never robbed a bank. I've never killed anyone. How can I be a sinner? He had me read another verse from the scriptures. And Jesus said, "If you look at a woman to lust after her, you've committed adultery with her already in your heart." And I remember when I read that verse, he opened the Bible and he had me read that verse, it really hit me. And why would that hit me so hard? Well, it hit me so hard because at the age of 14, I started working in a gas station on the Hutchinson River Parkway, which is just outside New York City, and I worked both sides of the road. There was a gas station on each side. And at the age of 14, I learned that when I cleaned the parking lots at the gas station on Friday nights, that I could find lots of pornographic magazines from salesmen that were on their way home for the weekend. And I became readily addicted to pornography at the age of 14. There was no internet in those days. And I didn't think anybody knew. And I get to college, and a man spoke a word 2,000 years ago that really impacted me. I didn't think anybody knew. And it's a very odd thing. I realized for the first time in my life that I was a sinner. We read many other verses about how Jesus died for me, that while I was yet a sinner, and he provides this way. And then it was the night of November 7th, 1977. So this occurred in August. And so a few months later, I had been thinking about this and thinking about this. I was all alone in my room. I was in that room right there, room 1812. Lawrence Dormitory, Lawrence Hall at Syracuse University. That room right there. And I got down on my knees, and I don't know what prompted me to do that, because Jews stand when they pray, Christians sit when they pray, from what I had seen. And I said, Lord, forgive me because I am a sinner, and come into my life. And at that moment, I felt this amazing rush of forgiveness come over me. And then all of a sudden, somebody was standing in my room. My roommate was gone, and I opened my eyes. Who's in my room? And I didn't see anyone, but the presence was so deep and so intense that I just started weeping. And I wasn't scared. It was just a presence that was so overwhelmingly forgiving. I was changed at that moment, on that day. And I didn't know what I was going to do. Who am I going to tell? This Jewish kid from New York City, what am I going to say? I didn't even know what to say, and I didn't tell anyone. 2 weeks later, the guy who had shared with me saw me walking on the floor. He said, Jim, have you received Jesus in your heart? I said, I think I have. Why do you ask? He says, you haven't stopped smiling for weeks. Something happened to me. Something happened at that time. And I started reading the scriptures shortly after that, and I started in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, and I read all the way through to Revelation chapter 22. And I just pick up where I left off the day before. And I've kept up that pattern ever since. So I haven't stopped doing it. So for over 35 years I've been doing that. When I'm done, I start again. Just read it. It's a book. And I said, Lord, speak to me. I also had the blessing of being discipled by some men, Christian men that I had met, and 3 of the 4 of them were professors, and just really impacted my life and taught me and instructed me. That's my story. That's how I came to faith. Here's a summary of the gospel, because this verse, this one section, in the New American Standard Bible, it's one sentence, amazingly, but it's 4 verses, and it says this: For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all men. So think about that. Grace is an undeserved gift. He gives it to us, to everyone. He offers this gift, instructing us to deny ungodliness and worldly desires, and to live sensibly, righteously, and godly in the present age. What he wants to do is he comes and he wants to change our hearts. He wants to change our attitudes. He wants to take bitterness out of us. What really hit me that day on November 7th, 1977, I had been addicted to pornography, and if you've ever had an addiction, you know how compelling a thing that can be. That broke that day. Now, I had many other things in my life that took years to work out. But that one, the Lord used that to convict me of my sin, and he showed me his power by delivering me from pornography that day. There has never been another desire for it. He teaches us to live differently. Then it goes on, he says, looking for the blessed hope and the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Christ Jesus. This speaks of the resurrection, that he rose from the dead and he's coming again. And he drops it within the heart of men and women, the truth of his resurrection. It's a very odd thing to believe, because we don't have a whole lot of data points on this. This was a miracle. Then he says, who gave himself for us to redeem us from every lawless deed, and to purify for himself a people for his own possession. This gives me self-worth. This takes me from a place of low self-esteem to say that God cared enough about me to redeem me, and to purify me, and to call me his own possession. That will raise your self-esteem. And make me zealous for good deeds. Every other religion, what you do is you work really hard for the hope of somehow getting saved. Do lots and lots of good deeds, and maybe if your good deeds outweigh your bad deeds, you'll somehow get to heaven, maybe. But Christianity is totally different. He saves us just who we are. He saves us. He reaches down and he saves us. Then he says, now, go and do good deeds. Deeds good deeds are an outworking of his salvation. He accepts us for who we are. He gives us self-worth. And he says, go out and change the world. Go do good deeds. We don't do good deeds to get saved. We get saved to do good deeds. This is my family. This is my wife. We met at Syracuse University. We've been married 33 years. I had no idea the treasure that I was marrying. I only knew her a very little bit. And what God does is he gives us treasures. I had prayed for 2 years that the Lord would grant to me the woman that he had for me to marry. And what a treasure I got. If you've not prayed for your future spouse, you really ought to. Because you messed that one up, and it's a real mess. This is my oldest daughter, Umbreen, and her husband, Philip, and their 2 children, my 2 granddaughters. This is my next daughter, Sabrina. So Umbreen is a mediator between Palestinians and Israelis. She's been living in Israel since 2008. She's fluent in Arabic and Hebrew. Sabrina is a lawyer in Houston. Josiah is in medical school, and Ben is in his junior year at Rice. This is the blessing of the Lord, great blessing of the Lord. Does science make faith obsolete? Well, science has never shaken my faith. Never shaken my faith. There was a man named Lord Kelvin. We name our Kelvin temperature scale from him, our absolute temperature scale. Around 1870, he said, "I've long felt that there was a general impression that the scientific world believes science has discovered ways of explaining all the facts of nature without adopting any definite belief in a creator. I have never doubted that impression was utterly groundless." Science actually strengthens my faith. The more I study science, the more it strengthens my faith. Lord Kelvin said, "The more thoroughly I conduct scientific research, the more I believe science excludes atheism. If you think strongly enough, you will be forced by science to belief in God, which is the foundation of all religion." When I see biological systems, we were one day building a molecular computer, and we had to call it a molecular computer because we were originally calling it a synthetic brain. And DARPA said, "No, you can't do that, you get in trouble. The press would be all over this thing." And 10 years later, they had a synthetic brain project. They're just trying to build molecules, a disordered array of molecules, and giving voltage pulses, causing it to do something useful, just building simple things like AND gates, OR gates, and half adders. And then my 3-year-old son came running to me. And there's all this sophistication in his brain, and he's just running and talking. He says, "I put it over here." I said, "What did you do?" He says, "I put it over there." And his brain is totally logical. Our language is so messed up. I did put. It doesn't put ED at the end of short words. But his brain automatically did that. He was doing it right. The language does it wrong. You see that the extrapolation is just thinking, this thinking being. I watch a mosquito flying around, and there's this brain in this mosquito. And it lands and it stings, and what it does, it starts emitting small molecules, which calls in other mosquitoes to say, "There's meat here, come." And then it flies away. This tiny little brain and all this sophistication, so hard to build that. How do you do it? You look at a biological system, it will drive you to wonder. There's an excitement of being a scientist with faith. Ronald Ross discovered that malaria comes from a parasite that lives in the mosquito's stomach. Before that, it was believed that they lived in marshes. And in 1897, on the day that he discovered this, he was working in India. He came from a wealthy British family. He was a physician working in India. I mean, just beautiful story, but he couldn't there were people that would fan him. He couldn't have it because it would blow the parts around. He got malaria just studying this thing. But on the day that he discovered this, he wrote a poem to his wife, and he was obviously a reader of the scriptures. Here's Ronald Ross, and he wrote this poem. "This day, relenting God has placed within my hand a wondrous thing, and God be praised at his command. Seeking his secret deeds with tears and toiling breath, I find thy cunning seeds, O miserable murdering death. I know this little thing a myriad men will say, O death, where is thy sting? Thy victory, O grave." This is obviously a man who studies the Bible. Just by those of you who read the scriptures will recognize the verses here. But he was so excited with the science that he was doing and with the joy of being a believer in God and doing this science. I'll tell you one story from my own life. September 3rd, 1993, I was in the Purdue Memorial Union Hotel. I had gotten my PhD in 1986, and I started it, and then I did 2 years of postdoc. I started as a professor in 1988. By 1991, I had gotten tenure. God really blessed. And by 1983, I was invited back to Purdue to give a talk. And I was praying in the hotel there. I was praying that morning, as I do every morning, and I pray before every lecture that the Lord would fill me and empower me. And as I was praying, I said, Lord, I pray, because the Lord really raised my faith. And the reason I prayed this is I was reading this verse that day. Truly I say to you, if you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what was done to this fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, be taken up and cast into the sea, it will happen. I said, Lord, you're really raising my faith. I pray today that the seminar that I give in the chemistry department at Purdue University will be the best chemistry department seminar ever. Now the department's 100 years old. I said, Lord, how am I going to know? Now my professor, the one with whom I had gotten my PhD, H. Nagishi, he won the 2010 Nobel Prize in Chemistry, but this was 1993. He was just a regular guy in 1993. When I was working for him, no matter how good my results were, he would say, pretty good, for your level. And I never got past the guy's waist. And I said, Lord, if it's the best seminar ever, confirm it by that man saying to me today that it was a super seminar. Word that he didn't normally use. I said, I pray that he says that it was a super seminar. But when I got done giving that lecture, I knew God had blessed and anointed. He was sitting right up on the front row. He stood up. He raised his hand, he said, Super! Super! Sitting right behind him on the end was another man whom I knew from my graduate school days. That was H.C. Brown. He won the 1979 Nobel Prize in Chemistry. So he had already been a Nobel Prize winner at that time for the hydroboration reaction. Many of you may have learned that if you took organic chemistry. And he was sitting on the second row, and I went down and I walked up to him. I said, thank you for coming to the seminar today. And we were shaking hands, and he held on to my hand. He said, I want you to know something. I said, what's that, sir? He said, that was the best seminar I've ever seen in my life. I said, that's very kind of you to say that. And in typical Nobel Prize winning fashion, he said, I'm not saying it to be kind, I really mean it. This is the excitement that comes being a scientist with faith. You can couple these two beautifully. See God intervene. Now let's look at a cell. How does a cell operate chemically? So here's a picture of a cell. This is a factory. It is a machine. You go into a factory. How do you get materials from point A to point B in a factory? You have these overhead hangers that pick up material and deliver it around. You have to do this in a factory. This is what a cell is. It is a factory. Though I don't understand the vast chemical mechanisms in a cell, nobody does. It clearly does operate. It's not improper to ask the question, by what chemical mechanism does it function? The very question spawns further investigation. We ask questions, and it spawns investigation. This is the way science is done. You ask questions, and you don't know, and you go probing. And you might get the answer to that question, and you turned over 5 more questions. This is the beauty of science. And you start answering those, and boom, for each one you get 5 more questions. You're never out of work. I mean, it's just more and more questions are there. A cell is an amazing machine. But there's an area where you're not allowed to ask questions in science. You can't question it. It's an interesting area. You know, religions are like that. Some religions don't like you to question them. You question that, your eyes will fall out of your head. Your firstborn will die. Don't question it. Just believe. Christianity is not like that. Christianity invites questions. Science invites questions. But there's an area of science that does not invite questions. The question often asked of me by students is, what do you think about evolution? Well, I wrote about it on my website. Now, I'm a chemist. And I know molecular structure. I know a lot about molecular structure. I know what molecules can do and what they can't do. And if I can't understand something, nobody else can. In that area, I mean it. If I can't understand it, if somebody can't explain it to me, nobody can understand it. And I'm all ears. Explain it to me. So all of my colleagues are Darwinists, and I love them as people, and I deeply respect them as scientists. And I hope they feel the same about me. Here, a Darwinist holds that random mutation and natural selection account for the complexity of life. So that's a definition of Darwinism, which is an accurate definition, but people have different definitions, so I define it here. The thing that most often impacts my Darwinist friends is this: when they are confronted with a Darwinian skeptic who is an equally accomplished scientist. I don't want to be an attacking critic. I just want to learn. I just want to learn. So I just ask them to explain to me from a chemical perspective evolution. Just explain it to me. Simple thing, right? Just explain it to me. Put this up on my website about 10 years ago. Quoting from my website. Some are disconcerted or even angered that I signed a statement back in 2001 along with 700 other scientists. We are skeptical of the claims for the ability of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life. Careful examination for the evidence of Darwinian theory should be encouraged. That's it. I signed that statement. Why did I sign that statement? I don't know why I did that. It was sent to me by an email. You know how you're plowing through emails? You just got to get through. Somebody said, could you agree with this? I said, yes, boom. Little did I know it would become the touchstone of the argument. People say, because you signed this statement, you are one of that crowd. I said, what crowd? The crowd that doesn't believe in Darwinian evolution. I said, what do you mean? I don't understand it. All it says is, it doesn't say Darwinian evolution is wrong. It doesn't say it. All it says is, we're skeptical of the claims. Careful examination of the Darwinian theory should be encouraged. Any other field, you can ask the question. It deserves careful examination. They'd say, yeah, bring it on. Bring on the careful examination. It'll hold up, right? You think it'd be fine. Not this question. Don't touch that, because it's like a religion. We can't explain it to you, but don't touch it. I go on to say, I simply do not understand chemically how macroevolution could have happened. Hence, am I not free to join the ranks of the skeptical and to sign such a statement without reprisals from those that disagree with me? Furthermore, when I, a nonconformist, ask proponents for clarification, they get flustered in public and confessional in private, wherein they sheepishly confess that they do not understand either. I have sat with Nobel Prize winners in my office, National Academy member winners in my office, and I say to them, do you understand? Do you understand evolution from a chemical perspective? Can you show me how these steps occur chemically? Every one of them has said no. Every one of them. When I ask them in small groups, you know what they do? They don't say a word. They just stare at me. Because in a small group, they don't want other people to know that they don't understand. So, but remember, no answer is an answer in itself. Why is it that they don't say anything? What's going on here? Well, that's all I'm saying. I don't understand. But when I ask it, when I'm saying it, but I am saying it publicly as opposed to privately. Does anyone understand the chemical details behind macroevolution? If so, I would like to sit with that person and be taught, so I invite them to meet with me. Lunch will be my treat. Until then, I maintain that no chemist understands, hence we are collectively bewildered. And I have not even addressed origin of first life issues. For me, that's even more scientifically mysterious than evolution. So I put this on my website. Why did I do this? Because I came under attack. And I said, okay, you guys are going to attack me? I'll come out of the closet. And I'll start telling the world I don't understand, and see how many of you stand up and start teaching me how to do this. I put this up on my website. The Atheist Society of America contacted me. They said they'll pay for the lunch, and they encouraged their members to go and have lunch with me. Nobody came. 10 years, nobody will come for a free lunch. And I even say in there that I won't even argue with you. I will only ask a question when I stop understanding. There are more chemists and chemical engineers in the city of Houston than any city in the world. It's a city of 4.5 million, but because of the petrochemical industry, it is filled with chemists and chemical engineers. Why doesn't anybody come? You'd think one of my colleagues from evolutionary biology would put their arm on my shoulder. Hey, Jim, let's go to lunch. Buy me lunch. I'll explain it to you. No. Nobody comes. What's going on here? Is this a religion or is it a science? I don't understand. Sure, microevolution, I understand. I didn't coin these terms. Microevolution, macroevolution were coined long before I started coining it. This was coined by the biologists themselves. If you fly over a city at 30,000 feet, you say, oh, hey, there's a city. You want to really understand the city, you got to get down in that city. Biologists fly over at 30,000 feet. You want to understand it, you got to go to the molecular level. Nobody understands. And this is easy compared to the origin of first life. I've recently written an article called Abiogenesis Nightmare. It's going to appear in the online journal Inference in January. Abiogenesis is the prebiotic process before biology, wherein life, such as a cell, arises from non-living simple organic compounds. They are carbohydrates, nucleic acids, lipids, and proteins. Proteins are polymers of amino acids. All this is needed before evolution can begin. So before evolution can even begin, you got to have the basic molecules. You got to have a cell. How do you get the cell? Well, the cell has to come from some non-living thing. How could that be? Before life, how do you do it? I maintain, these are all quotes from the article that I've written. I maintain that the strongest evidence against the proposals of current prebiotic research is the researchers' own data. The current proposals can retard the field from discovering the scientific solutions since they seem to be directing research down paths of futility. They're directing researchers down paths of futility. I went back to the proposals on how they believe that the carbohydrates and all these chemicals were made. And I read the actual experimentals. They did it in very controlled conditions in the laboratory, and even then they didn't even get many of the things that would be possible in a prebiotic milieu. Because many times they say themselves that what they got was the kinetic product. In other words, the material formed, but it only formed for a short time and then it's transformed into other junk. That's the kinetic product. It forms and then it goes away. That's the way organic chemistry is done. You got to stop the reaction when it's done. But when there's no one there to stop it, it doesn't stop. It goes on to polymeric garbage. That's what it goes to. And then they ran it under very controlled conditions, up to 70 degrees C, and then cooling down and evaporating off the ice at 0.001 atmospheres. I mean, crazy for prebiotic conditions and carefully controlled conditions, but let's give them that. Let's give prebiotic proposals a chance. Let's assume that all the building blocks for life, not just the precursors, and they've only made a few simple precursors, but let's just assume they have it all, could be made in high degrees of purity, including homochirality, were applicable for all the carbohydrates, all the amino acids, all the nucleic acids, and all the lipids. Let's further assume that they're comfortably stored in cool caves away from sunlight and away from oxygen where they would decompose, so that they're stable against environmental degradation. And let's further assume that they all existed in one corner of the Earth and not separated by thousands of kilometers or in different planets. And that they all existed not just in the same square kilometer, but in neighboring pools where they could conveniently and somehow selectively mix with each other. Let's just assume that. Let's just give them that. Now what? How do they assemble? Without enzymes, remember, there's no biology yet. Without enzymes, the mechanisms don't exist for their assembly. It will not happen, and there's no synthetic chemist that would claim differently, because to do so would take enormous stretches of conjecture beyond any that is realized in the field of chemical sciences. And if there's a chemist here, stand up, tell me I'm wrong. Let us further assume that the world's top 100 synthetic chemists, we're going to have a dream team here, top 100 biochemists, top 100 evolutionary biologists, and anyone else you want, combine forces into the limitlessly funded dream team. The dream team has all the carbohydrates, lipids, amino acids, and nucleic acids stored in freezers in their laboratories, not in caves, in freezers. All are in 100% in antimeric purity. Even give the team all the reagents they wish, and the most advanced laboratories and analytical facilities, and the complete scientific literature, and the synthetic and natural yet non-living coupling agents. Now ask the dream team to assemble their building blocks into a living system. Nothing complex, just a simple cell. Go ahead. They will merely scratch their heads and walk away frustrated. But now, even give them the polymerized forms, the polypeptides, all the enzymes they desire, the polysaccharides, DNA and RNA in any sequence they want, all cleanly assembled. Give them that. Ask the dream team to assemble those into a living system. The level of sophistication in even the simplest of possible living cells is so chemically complex that we're even more clueless now than anything we discussed regarding prebiotic chemistry or macroevolution. The dream team will not know where to start. Moving all this off Earth does not solve the problem because our physical laws are universal. Any professors here want to tell me something different? Those that think that scientists understand the issues of prebiotic chemistry are wholly uninformed. Nobody understands. Maybe one day we will, but that day is far from today. So to make ad hominem attacks upon those who are skeptical of the science today can be inhibitory to the progress of science. Would it not be helpful to express to students the massive gaps in our understanding so that they, as the next generation of academic soldiers, could seek to propel the field upon a firmer and possibly a radically different scientific basis, rather than upon increasingly ambitious extrapolations that are entirely unacceptable in the practice of chemistry? The basis upon which we as scientists are relying is so shaky that it would be best to openly state the situation for what it is, a mystery. That might catalyze some fresh scientific thoughts on abiogenesis. Last week, I was with another Nobel Prize winner. He gave a talk on modeling the functioning of an enzyme. And I walked up to him afterwards. I said, you know, I'm writing this article on abiogenesis. Tell me, where does all this come from? And he mumbled some stuff. He said, let's be clear. Tell me where it comes from. He says, what did you write in your article where it came from? I said, I wrote, it's a mystery. He says, that's exactly what it is. That's what it is. It's a mystery. What's the outcome of my skepticism? Have I been denied tenure? No. But I got tenure in 1991 when there were no significant issues. And I'm also not a biologist, I'm a chemist. It might keep some from getting tenure today. Why is that? Why should their lack of understanding, lack of being able to understand evolution, why should that stop somebody from getting tenure? Because it's a religion. Because we don't want people arguing with our religion. If it were so easy, go to the guy's office or the woman's office, don't deny them tenure, just explain it to them. And they'll go, oh, I get it now. Can I have tenure? Loss of funding? Maybe, but I can't positively identify it. Have I had harassment? Not to any significant degree. Ridicule? Sometimes, but often not directly, but not often directly to my face. Confrontations? Yes, but they're often diffused with a few questions. I just ask the question, okay, show me. Show me. That's it. I get very quiet very fast. Have I not been hired for a position? I suspect so. Excluded from professional societies? Yes. Imagine that. Imagine you graduate. Imagine you were to graduate. You've done everything for graduation and they wouldn't let you get your degree. You say, why not? Well, because you don't conform to what we conform to in one area. We're not talking about, you know, you are a member of the Ku Klux Klan or anything. It's just a simple thing. You don't conform to something that you don't understand. Oh, well, you're not going to get your degree. How would you feel? How would you feel that you're not getting your degree? All your friends are getting it because they go, yeah, we understand, yeah. That's exactly how scientists feel when they don't get promoted into certain societies because they are willing to come out and say they don't understand. That's what's going on in the worlds of science. And I told them that I will start telling this message because of what they've done. And I love that, but I'm going to expose it. Those who criticize us are probably no more mistaken than those who praise us. Try to win your critic with double kindness. That's what Charles Spurgeon said. Those who criticize us are probably no more mistaken than those who praise us. So I try to take it lightly and then just press on. Why do few chemists speak up regarding difficulties with evolution and origin of life? Why are there so few of us speaking up? Few think about it intently. They're just too busy with other things. You know, most chemists don't sit back and reflect on this. They've never been asked to reflect on it. And they think that somebody else understands. They're just like you. You think, oh, well, the scientists understand. I don't understand, but the scientists understand. Even other scientists think, well, other scientists understand. Sometimes it's viewed as the only ball game in town. We don't have another way. Some people say, Jim, you shouldn't dismiss it until you have your own theory. And I say, are you crazy? That's not the way we teach mechanisms. What we do is we say, we can propose a mechanism. If the mechanism does not fit all the facts, then you have to reject that proposed mechanism. You don't just hold on to it until you come with a better one. That would be like a prosecutor saying, I'm going to see that person goes in jail, even though the evidence is so flimsy. But because I don't have someone else to convict, let's just throw that person in jail. How would you feel about that? It's exactly what's happening. Their fear of being ostracized and fear of reprisals. That's real. That's why they're not speaking up. Fear of being ostracized and fear of reprisals. This happened also in the Bible. It says, nevertheless, many even of the rulers believed on him. That means Jesus. But because of the Pharisees, they were not confessing him for fear that they would be put out of the synagogue. For they loved the approval of men rather than the approval of God. Some people don't speak up, but it hurts when they don't speak up. Max Planck, we have Planck's constant from this. He said, a new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die. This is what I think is going to happen. They're going to die. And then younger people are going to come forward and say, we don't understand it either. That's how well entrenched it is. You just have to wait till they die. The hope that I see is this. Science is self-correcting. If Darwinian theory and abiogenesis proposals are correct, the chemical descriptions will become evident. As of today, in my opinion, there is little such evidence, so further investigation is warranted. Say, continue to investigate. I'm not saying it's not the answer. I can't prove it's not the answer. But investigate it because it's really shaky. The younger generation has a deeper sense of social fairness and justice, and they are less impressed with conformal academic fluff. I have enormous hope in young people. I have 50 to 60, sometimes 70 young people in my home every week for meals. Dude, college students. My wife serves them all. I told you she's a gem. She's amazing. And all I do is talk. But I have this tremendous respect for young people because I think they have far more sense of social justice than does my generation. My generation is keeping this thing quiet. You guys are going to come forth and say, I don't get it. Could you explain it to me? And then watch them sweat. This is Rick Smalley, a good friend of mine, had won the 1996 Nobel Prize for the discovery of Buckminster fullerene. He came to the Lord just a few years before his death. The primary mission, my primary mission to which I'm called, is to reflect the love of Jesus. That's what I do. Let me just mention something else. I'm not a philosopher. I'm not a philosopher. So when the questions come, keep them scientific or keep them about my faith or Christianity, but I'm not a philosopher. But I like to read about what certain men have said. There's an amazing man. His name is Viktor Frankl. He's an Auschwitz survivor. He lost his mother, his father, and his brother in the concentration camps. He's also a neurologist and a physicist. He was a neurologist and physicist before he went to the concentration camp, and he became very famous after the concentration camp because he survived it. And he wrote in The Doctor and the Soul, he said this, if we present man with a concept of man which is not true, we may well corrupt him. When we present man as an automaton of reflexes, as a mind machine, as a bundle of instincts, as a pawn of drives and reactions, as a mere product of instinct, heredity, and environment, we feed the nihilism to which modern man is, in any case, prone. I became acquainted with the last stage of that corruption in my second concentration camp, Auschwitz. The gas chambers of Auschwitz were the ultimate consequence of the theory that man is nothing but the product of heredity and environment, or as the Nazis liked to say, of blood and soil. I am absolutely convinced that the gas chambers of Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Majdanek were ultimately prepared not in some ministry or other in Berlin, but rather at the desks and lecture halls of nihilistic scientists and philosophers. That is where taking God out of the equation might lead us. That is what that man said. With that, I say, does science make faith obsolete? Not for me. I'll be glad to take questions.
I'm just going to ask a few questions to get us started. So, first question, you've spoken out on your skepticism about evolution. Are there any parts of evolutionary theory that you agree with or understand?
Not a lot.
Not a lot.
Not a lot, because when you look at what has to happen molecularly for macroevolution, there are small changes. We see it all the time in the laboratory. We can do microevolutions, very small changes. But when you have large structural change from one organ to another, say, it is very hard to see how these molecular changes could have happened. You have to have structural changes in the DNA occurring that are so vast that it can't predict what it's going to get. Then it has to do that repeatedly and repeatedly and repeatedly. I was in the Weizmann Institute in Israel, speaking to a biophysicist. He was describing to me the ear, how we can hear all these tonal differences as human beings. There's a bar in our ear that vibrates. And that bar has a different modulus, meaning a different stiffness as you go along the bar. It's very hard to materially build something like that. And I asked him, I said, could you tell me how something like this could evolve? And he looked at me and says, Jim, typical Jewish response, Jim, you know we all believe in evolution, but we have no idea how it happened. And this is basically what it is. You know, this is what happens behind the closed doors. You want to hear what happens? That's what happens behind the closed doors of science. So no, just about nothing.
Okay, totally different question. So as a renowned scientist, how can you believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead?
This is a very good question. How can I believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ? I've spent a long time studying the physical resurrection. So this is an historical proof. And historical proof is not something you can put under a microscope. What you do is you look at evidence from eyewitnesses, you look at evidence from the times, and we use historical proofs to hang people, so they can be quite valid. What you do is you look at the consistency of the evidence from the times. You look at the writings from the times, how many of them there are, how many eyewitnesses there were, and how they corroborate between them. And if they corroborate perfectly, you know there's been collusion, because no two stories corroborate perfectly. When you synthesize all this together, and I have on my website, if you go to jmtour.com, on my website, under personal topics, audio files, under individual messages, in April of 2014, April 2014, I gave a talk at Rice University on the validity of the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ. Looking at the documents of the time, and it's got PowerPoint, a PDF of slides along with audio, and I go through step by step of the veracity of the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ. It is an historical event that can be historically shown.
Okay, I'll ask one more question, and if people are interested in asking questions, you can line up at this microphone or this microphone, and we'll let's keep it to 3 at each microphone. And also, while you're there, please remember to fill out your survey cards if you haven't already.
And let me just mention, if you could frame your question in the form of a question, it would really help.
Okay, last question is, do you see the modern university setting as a welcoming place for discussing the intersections of faith and science? And if not, how could it be made more open to wrestling with these questions?
Well, I think that I'm standing here today as a testimony to the openness of it. It's interesting that I think it is quite open. Once I was asked to speak on a panel on tolerance in the university, at Rice University, the place that I teach, and on the panel was myself, a religion professor, and a religion professor who comes from the Christian background, and then a professor from economics who was a Muslim. And I got up there and I said, I think there's enormous religious tolerance. That I'm standing here being able to speak says that there's a lot of tolerance and I can speak. And then a religion professor got up and he proceeded to just blast me for talking to students about faith when I have no formal training in religion, and how I shouldn't be sharing these things on a campus. And then the Muslim professor got up and said, I'm fine with what Jim says. So the religion professor had a lot of trouble with my having this freedom. So I think in general we have freedom to say this. There are some people who wouldn't like for it to happen, and they generally don't show up to these forums, but then I'm here. I still think that the university campus allows freedom for this.
That's great. Okay, so there's a microphone here and here if you have any questions for Professor Tor.
My name is Alexander Durrell. Thank you for coming. Let's hear about this 3 years with my PhD in chemical engineering. Just really spent a lot of time in nanostructured materials processing and synthetic techniques. So very familiar with your work, so I was very excited to hear your talk, especially on such a very important topic that is shunned from discussion. I also think that it's, and there's a question coming out, quick comment. I don't think the conversation was adequately addressed.
Can you get to your question?
Yeah, it's evolution isn't really what makes science and faith not coherent. It's physics, and for example, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. How do you basically deal with the probabilistic nature of when you look at items and they're pretty much amalgamations of electrons, neutrons, and protons, and then still find faith? Is the way I come to terms is, if God does exist, I'm an engineer, so I'm using what He gave me anyway.
And your question is?
How do you come to grasp with quantum point of view of life?
So this is the beautiful thing about science, is that I see things in molecular terms. There's no way you're going to use your quantum mechanics and Heisenberg uncertainty principle to synthesize morphine. Go ahead, take your knowledge of Heisenberg uncertainty principle and synthesize morphine from it. You can't do it, can you? So there are different levels in which each of our sciences operate. So the physicist would say theirs is more basic. The mathematician would turn to you and say, no, math is more basic. But no, each one has its level of entry. When we are discussing molecular forms, when we are discussing, this is a molecular basis, this is the basis at which to discuss it. When you talk to a synthetic chemist, this is the basis in which I see it. The beautiful thing about science is you see it at a different level, and you're amazed at it as well. And so a mathematician sees it as another level. Mathematicians have a lot of trouble with evolution, strictly from a mathematical basis. Huge troubles with it from a mathematical basis. So each one of us approaches it at a different level, but that's the beautiful thing about science. It's really quite amazing, isn't it?
It very much is so. Again, your point of view is I'm glad you're actually promoting for the skeptic point of view.
Thank you.
I'm actually a little bewildered that you're getting so much blowback by it. But one criticism I have is.
Sorry I have to interrupt. We want to give other people a chance to ask questions. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just have a comment about the presentation. It's very impressive. It seems like you're giving sort of an irreducible complexity type of argument.
I haven't used those terms. That's not terms that I normally use. Those terms are not normally found in synthetic chemistry. That's terms.
Biology.
That's terms that some biologists use, right?
Well, my comment is I'm not a scientist by trade. I'm something of a Kantian philosopher. And I feel that there was some discussion there about finding the mechanism for abiogenesis. And an important principle in Kant's philosophy of science is that science depends on autonomy, our ability to inquire into why things are. And if we had this mechanism, explain the origins of life, science would come to an end, it seems, because we could no longer not only ask about it, but if we knew everything about everything, we would find that we can't even make it better than it is.
I'm going to ask, can you ask your question, if you have a question?
My question is it plausible to think that if we had a mechanism that explained the origin of life, that science would no longer be possible?
No, I don't think that that's true at all. I don't think so. I mean, so somebody gives me a mechanism, so I die now? I mean, no, I think that science doesn't cease to exist at all. I mean, from a faith side, apart from a faith side, I believe that God created all things. But he gives no mechanism by which he did that. He says that he formed Adam from the soil, from the dirt of the ground, from the clay of the ground. He formed Adam, depending on which translation you use. But no details are there. So that's as much as he tells us. But if we were to find the mechanism, and if somebody comes with a mechanism for macroevolution that really shows the molecular structure, science doesn't cease to exist. No, I mean, there's so many other things to discover. We still make supercapacitors and new materials and de-icing glass so. But what you're saying may be deeper than I'm grasping because you're a philosopher, and so that could well be, and I told you I'm not a philosopher, so I don't even grasp things sometimes in those terms.
I would like to have some further correspondence in the future if possible, but
Okay,
I think that's sufficient.
Okay, but remember what happens is when I type, I'm not that fast. So I'm very short and concise. So you may send me, a huge page, and I'm going to send you back 2 sentences, as long as you understand that.
That's fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
All right.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Is this thing on? Yeah. So this question relates a little bit to what you were saying at the start. You said that you had a way of mass producing graphene, and is that what actually goes and makes things such as carbon nanofibers?
No, so if you're going to make graphene, really high quality electronics grade graphene, you're going to grow that on copper, not even nickel, because nickel has more domains. You're going to grow that on copper. What you want to be able to do is you want to be able to grow that as single crystals on copper. So it's a very slow growth process. It grows as a hexagonal array because you get the zigzag edges growing selectively over the armchair edges. And that's the grade that you're going to have for very high scale electronics. For bulk applications, you can make graphene in other ways. So for example, you can take graphite and treat it with potassium permanganate and sulfuric acid and get graphene oxide. That way you can get it separated. Then you can reduce it either thermally or chemically. So you can have CCG, chemically converted graphene, or you can have just do this thermally, but it's not as high quality. But that's how you get bulk graphene generally. To make a kilo of really electronics graphene grade as monolayer is very hard to do because a kilo would probably cover the earth. I mean, it's maybe not the earth, but a huge, maybe the United States would cover. This is a huge amount because it's only 1 atom thick.
So essentially what you're saying is it's not plausible to use this as a construction material or such.
Oh, graphene? Oh, it is, but you not electronics grade, you use materials grade, and that's what you make carbon fibers out of. So we've made carbon fibers out of graphene, but by chemically converted graphene. So you take graphene oxide, you can spin carbon fibers from that and then reduce it, or you can take the graphene that you've made from graphene oxide and then spin that from a superacid. It's a fuming acid.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, next question. And please, if you have questions, even basic questions or anything, line up the microphones.
You mentioned that the resurrection of Jesus, physical, corporeal, is scientifically valid. Now,
I said it was a historical proof.
right,
Historical.
right, it is historical. Okay. Now, which, as I understand it, means that it would be valid for a scientist to believe in the historicity of the resurrection of Jesus.
Correct.
Okay. Now, my question has to do with St. Paul's understanding of his theology of the resurrection, which is so intimately connected with this theology of sin. And Paul says, death came into the world because of sin. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. The wages of sin is death. The theology which is developed mostly in the letter to the Romans. So my question is sin a meaningful scientific idea? Meaning, since death, which is clearly physical, is related to sin in Paul's theology, how do you talk about sin as a scientist?
Well, you know, I'm not sure how I define sin as a scientist, but a sin means a violation from God's word. Jesus said, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word. And my Father will love him. And we will come to him and make our abode with him. Think about what he says. He says, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word. This is in John 14:23. If anyone loves me, he will keep my word. So, keeping the words of Jesus, the commandments of Jesus, he equates to love. How does he measure our love? It's not because they say, oh, hallelujah, Jesus. He measures my love based on how I keep his word. He says, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word. And the result of this is, and my Father will love him. So he's saying God, his Father, the creator of the entire universe, will love me if I keep the Son's word. You know, if you really want to be my friend, if anyone here really wants to be my friend, you want to win my friendship, you do something good to one of my children. I will really like you. God's the same way. You obey his Son, he really likes you. Then he says, and we will come to him. We will come to him. That means Jesus and his Father will come to you. Don't trouble yourself. We will come to you. He says, we will come to him and make our abode with him. What he promises us is his presence, himself. Because the essence of penalty, is separation from him. That ultimately is what penalty is. That is what disobedience leads to. It's separation from the closeness of God. And so what he promises us is he promises us himself. He doesn't promise us material blessings. In the New Testament it says, with food and clothing, with that you shall be content. That's it. The only thing he promises us is food and clothing. If we have shelter overhead, that's an added blessing. With food and clothing, we are to be content. The foxes have holes, the birds of the air have nests, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Even Jesus didn't have a house. But it says that he promises us his presence. His presence. So sin separates us from his presence. And that is the ultimate penalty.
Okay, so you're interpreting death not in a physical sense, but in a spiritual sense.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Hi, please let me know if this question is a little too personal, but you mentioned that you were raised Jewish. How did your family respond to you becoming a Christian and your strength of your faith?
Right.
Did your parents ever challenge their faith?
So that's a good question. What happened in my family when I said I was a Christian? Well, I never stopped being Jewish. It's interesting, if you look at all the apostles, they never claimed to be Christians. They all claimed to be Jews following the sect of the Nazarenes. Even Paul said, I'm a Hebrew, so Benjaminite. He never said, I'm a Christian. Christians were what they were called in Antioch, this sect, but it had predominantly to do what the Gentiles who were following this sect were being called. The Jews still call themselves Jews, so I still consider myself a Jew, but I know exactly what you're talking about. So when I say that Jesus is the Messiah or whatever, but I know exactly what you're talking about, and it hurt them. It hurt them. But my parents had been through a lot. I've been the youngest of three. I'm the youngest of three. And my sister had been running around and doing things, and my brother had done a lot of crazy things, and I'll let my brother and sister share what they had done themselves rather than share. But both of them have succeeded quite well. My sister is head of research for from Microsoft, and she's a mathematical physicist. And my brother's the black sheep of the family. He's a lawyer. But so this was another in a saga of the kids doing things in their teen years that they thought that I was going to grow out of. But the intensity only grew. You know, I became more and more fervent in my faith. It was interesting, though, about 15 years ago, my mother and father visited, and my mother went up to, well, let me back up. Shortly after I claimed this new faith, my mother wanted to understand it. So I asked her, I said, well, why don't you read the New Testament and then you'll understand it. So she read the New Testament. She's a very careful reader. So she read the entire New Testament. Most Christians have never read the entire New Testament. The vast majority have not. And if they have read it, it wasn't pensively. But she reads very carefully, and she read the entire New Testament. I said, so what do you think? She says, I don't blame them for killing Jesus after the things that he said. Who does he think he is, going to these men that have dedicated their lives to religious instruction, taking care of these people, and telling them that they are whitewashed tombs? Who does he think he is? And that's exactly what she should say. If you read it, that's exactly what you're going to say. I said, okay, why don't you read the Old Testament? So that you get a background, because most Jews have never read the Old Testament. They'll say, oh no, I've heard all that, I've read it. No, they haven't. They've heard it, little snippets in their synagogues, but they've never read the whole thing pensively. They're just like Baptists, never read their word, okay? And so, it's true. It's true, from beginning to end. How many Baptists here have read the Bible from beginning to end? And how many Baptists here have not read the Bible from beginning to end? Okay, there you go, all right? All right. So, she read the entire Old Testament, and I said, what do you think? And you know what she said? Exactly what you should say, and it bothers Jews. She bothered the Christians, now she's going to bother the Jews. She said, the Jews deserve everything that ever happened to them. Now, that really bothers a Jew because they've never read their Tanakh. If you read the Tanakh, you see that God warned time and time and time and time again that this is what is going to happen because of disobedience. He gave them the 70 years in Babylon and Persia because of idol worship, because of not taking care of the poor, and because of not giving a Sabbath rest to the land. And he gave it in 70 years. And they learned Judaism has never suffered with idol worship after that's first dispersion. Never again. They broke them of that. But there was disobedience, repeated disobedience. And Jesus even came and he spoke about this sort of thing. And she read that and she said that. And then, years later, she came back and she visited us, and through a confluence of things, she started reading the Bible a second time through. She was reading that, and she was reading a devotional, and she was reading The Case for Christ, all at once. And she's a big reader. That's all my mother does. And she called me up one day, and she said, Jimmy, I believe. I said, what do you believe? She says, I believe Jesus is the Lord. She was reading, and just, bam, it just hit her. The next week she called me, and she said, Jimmy, you know, you can find any damn thing in the Bible. Now this is a 70-year-old woman. What do you expect? I mean, I said, what'd you learn in the Bible today? She said, it says husbands should love the wife of their youth. I said, yeah, well, why don't you tell Dad? She says, I did. I told him that. And I said, what did he say? And he said, I know all that already. So, you know, she just I don't know, just something hit her. And she came to believe that was about 13 years ago. About 13 years ago. So it hurt them. And then my father got hurt again when she believed. But what they've seen is really interesting. They've seen my life versus the life of my siblings. The things that they've gone through. And the things that have happened as a result of decisions. Because all of us can choose our own lifestyles. We have freedom to choose our own lifestyles. But we do not get to choose the consequences of those choices. I made a conscious decision to follow what the scriptures say. And as a result, my life, my family has been so blessed. I mean, so blessed. And they saw the results of that, and they will be the first to tell you that there is a massive difference in the quality of life that occurs in following the pattern of what I've been following. That's a long answer to a short question. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello. Thank you for coming. I just want to start off by saying I'm a finance major. So if I say anything obviously ignorant, just please forgive me, because I don't really understand everything. But But for me, I grew up in Bible Belt South, Nashville, Tennessee, and like the first thing people ask you is what church do you go to, and then you, or like I've had arguments with people who didn't believe in dinosaurs because they didn't co-align with like the timeline of the Bible. I mean, like I've had biology teachers not teach evolution because it didn't agree with their beliefs, and I feel like for me and for a lot of people that faith sometimes harms scientific inquiry, at least for me. And I feel like when you find most scientists, especially evolutionary biologists, and you ask them how was life originated, they don't have a problem with saying I don't know. They just have a problem with saying I think God did it. And I was just wondering what you felt about that.
All right, if they say I don't know, I'm perfectly fine with that. I don't know either. You don't have to bring God into this. I think that we ought to be teaching evolution in schools, but I think we ought to be teaching the theory of evolution, not the fact of evolution, and the difficulties with it. But it's all we've got to teach. Some people say, well, we ought to be teaching intelligent design. First of all, I don't know how to teach that. I don't know how to teach intelligent design in my science classroom. I don't know how to do that. I asked some of the top people in the intelligent design movement. And now, let me just first say that I believe God created the heavens and the earth. I don't know the details of how he did it. But I said, what is the strongest chemical argument for intelligent design? And he thought for a while. He said, statistical argument. I said, yes, statistics, we use that in chemistry. But that was it. It's going to be a very short lecture. I mean, that's it. And so it's hard to teach that. So what we can do is we can learn, okay, here's a possible mechanism, and here's the problems with it. I'm okay with that, as long as we say, here are the problems with it, and you're not excluded from our societies if you still have problems with it. So I'm okay with that. Now, there's another question. So I hear where you're coming from because 3 of my 4 children went to Christian schools, graduated from Christian schools. There's an age of the universe question, age of the earth, age of the universe. So some will take the Bible and they'll take the literal years that they can count back, and they'll take the 6 days of creation. God created the earth in 6 days, and he rested on the 7th. They'll take the 6 days of creation and say that those were literal 24-hour days. One of the best writings that I've read on this is from a man named Gerald Schroeder, called Age of the Universe. It's on the internet. It's only like 4 pages. Gerald Schroeder, doesn't matter how you spell it, Google will find it. Gerald Schroeder, Age of the Universe. And what he does, it is beautiful, magnificent. He's not a Christian. This is an Orthodox Jew. He lives in Jerusalem. He's a physicist. So you have this big bang, and we know our universe is expanding. That we know. Because we know that today is a longer day than yesterday. And we know that in the sense that our universe has expanded. And so we're growing further and further apart with time. But if you think about it, at the beginning, you're expanding very rapidly away from each other. Now we're so far apart that the changes are going very slowly. And when you do that, that first day is equivalent, when we look back from our perspective, as a very long time. Because so much has occurred in that first few moments, in that first week, in that first 6 days. So it's a magnificent argument, and I've shared this with my statistician friends, and they go, this is interesting. This guy seems to get it. And it's the total embodiment of old earth and young earth creationism. And why I say that is because it makes both sets of people correct. Meaning that when we look back from our perspective, that looks like a long period of time. But where it was happening very rapidly from their perspective, because we know there's a relativity in time as to where you are in space. Because time is relative. And so that is an excellent argument, and it's just that sometimes science teachers don't get it. And I know what I mean. I know what you mean, and I know the frustration. And so I hear you. But let me just also say this. If you look scripturally, the key thing is how long have human beings as we know them been around? How long have human beings as we know them? So the Bible would say sub 10,000 years, all right? Sub 10,000 years. Well, science tells us that human beings as we know them are sub 100,000 years and possibly sub 50,000 years. Documented human history is 5,000 years. The Bible will say that people have been around 7,000 to 10,000 years, sub 10,000. It's not much that much different. Certainly there were bipedal creatures, but when they had musical instruments, when they buried their dead, put trinkets in their graves, when there were sophisticated hunting techniques, this was all done by humans as we know them, that is scientifically sub 100,000 years and possibly even sub 50,000 years. And when you're talking geological type time frames, 50,000 is the same as 10,000. Do you understand what I'm saying? The numbers are just so big that those two differences are almost the same. So it's not that far off. But if you read this thing of Gerald Schroeder, it's a remarkable argument upon the relativity of time, which makes all this together.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, last question.
This is something I've done a little bit of reading on, and you've touched as well, where science, you could say, is comprised of these fields that are, in a sense, irreducible. You can't reduce chemistry to form biology, and vice versa. And these fields maybe tell us how things happen within their fields. But even if you brought them together, say, all of these fields of sciences, and they could tell you how the first cell came into being or how it formed, it wouldn't be able to tell you why or with what purpose such a thing would have happened. And I don't know, I think maybe that is where religion and God can come in, but he fills that gap. And I was going to ask what you thought about that.
I agree. I mean, it doesn't tell you the why. It doesn't tell you. When I see, I mean, if you look at a reaction, you can say the why. You can say, well, thermodynamically, it was favorable thermodynamically. That's a legal argument. We don't even know how to define energy. Yeah, we can use some equations, but what is energy? This is what Feynman said. Tell me, what is energy? What is consciousness? What is energy? They're fundamental things that we can't even define. The why is another question, and that's indeed where God can come in. And it's not that the beauties of God can't come in other things, but just seeing Him in the beauties of science. But yeah, the why questions are huge, huge. And you hear a guy like Viktor Frankl, who lived through the horror of concentration camps, and you say, well, maybe he's right. If we reduce all of this and we don't come up with a why, and we're just a bunch of protoplasm squirming around for a few years here on this earth without a why, then it makes perfect sense. You want to thin out population, just cull them out. If you just look at it purely biologically, just thin them out. But the why question is what makes people people.
Thanks again, Dr. Tour. We appreciate you taking the time to come.
For more information about the Veritas Forum, including additional recordings and a calendar of upcoming events, please visit our website at veritas.org.